Benvenute e benvenuti nel percorso di avvicinamento a Forum PA 2021. Oggi incontriamo e dialoghiamo con Sir Geoff Mulgan, professore di Intelligenza collettiva, politiche pubbliche e innovazione sociale alla UCL di Londra, in un'intervista che è solo un'anticipazione di quello che il professore ci racconterà nel Forum PA del prossimo giugno. A great welcome to Sir Geoff Mulgan, former director of the Young Foundation and the CEO of Nesta UK from 2011 to 2019, and currently professor of collective intelligence, public policy and social innovation at the UCL of London. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're having a good time.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure for us at Forum PA to have you here on our channels today, and an honor for me to have the possibility to discuss with you. So let's move on to the first question. Here at Forum PA, we have always promoted innovation as the possibility to improve productivity, but essentially as a way for a new model of development when we dealt with public administration, of course. And this health emergency due to the pandemics has forced public organizations to innovate, and showing that our organizational systems needs to be reformed, betting over creativity, I think, betting over long-term policies. So in our monitoring activity of the Italian territory, we detected a new centrality of social innovation projects as a responsive emergency response tool. So the question is something that you also find out in other countries? And do you think that it's finally the time for social innovation to be used as a validated tool to enhance social cohesion and reduce inequalities? And if so, how?
So yes, the last 12 months have seen extraordinary innovation by governments and businesses, putting in place vaccine programs, tracking infections, income support for families and businesses, as we haven't seen in a very long time. But it's also, I think, shone a light on the need for social innovation and social solutions. Part of that has been about providing people with support through the pandemic, particularly people who are isolated or lonely or don't have families. And all over the world, there's been a huge flowering of new methods of providing food support or visiting and so on. I think we've seen a big shift in attitudes to mental health, which has become much more visible in the crisis, particularly amongst young people. We have in many countries, a looming crisis of mental health problems amongst teenagers who've missed out on school, missed out on socialization in the last year. And then some countries have used the crisis to really speed up their action on homelessness, really almost solving some of the problems of street homelessness very fast last spring as the pandemic took hold. I think the big issue in the next 12 months will be how societies and governments really step up their ability to deal with some of the huge inequalities which have been exacerbated by the crisis. In the UK or the US, big inequalities on how it affects different ethnic minorities, big inequalities of how men and women have been affected by the crisis. Some areas of the labor market, huge job loss. Again, in my country just today, we've had new data showing how young people's jobs have disappeared far faster than jobs for old people in the last 12 months. And everywhere, the polls show that the public wants to see their governments use the crisis to deal with some of the fundamental problems of society, inequalities, climate change, and so on. You can see that in the huge energy of the Biden administration's spending plans. But I think it will be the detail of how that overall appetite for change is translated into detailed responses around care for the elderly, mental health, new opportunities for young people will be key. And I think this is part of a much broader shift to really taking the social side of innovation much more seriously and not just focusing on technology and business.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your insights. Are always interesting. Just before asking you the second question, I need to make two references. The first one is related to the fact that I am a passionate fan of TED Talks. So I went back to 2009, listening to one of yours in which, talking about the 2008 crisis, you said, we know that our societies have to radically change. We know we can't go back to where we were before the crisis. This sentence could be said even today, I think. And I think to the idea that we mentioned bureaucracies, we mentioned public administrations, and which are both the ones that need to be reformed, but also the ones that have the ability to shape innovation, in the sense that they can enhance potentially innovative projects. They can implement solutions for local and national problems. And the second reference is related to the white paper for social innovation, and particularly to the chapter titled Connecting People, Ideas and Resources, in which you underline the relationship and the role of intermediary subjects in discovering and bringing out innovation. So the question is, how could the public administration play a role of game changer in this process of restart?
Well, two responses. So the first one is really about history. I think it's now very clear that historians will judge that the 2007-8 financial crisis was not used in any way to fix the underlying problems of society. All the effort went into restoring the previous status quo, rebuilding the banks and their balance sheets, rebuilding the old economy. And in part, that was because people like President Obama brought in figures from Wall Street to lead economic policy in the US, and there was a very similar pattern in many other countries. So in a way, the people who were the cause of the crisis were asked often to fix the crisis, and literally none of the measures 10, 12 years ago were used to accelerate progress on getting carbon out of the economy, dealing with deep inequalities. And I think in the US, there's a real perception this time has to be different. This time the responses have to be used in a much more strategic way. As for your question about what that implies for how government works, in some ways my view is quite simple. In business, because of competitive pressures, any business which wants to survive has to be constantly hungry for seeking out innovations, new advances in technology or materials or business models or marketing. And they use intermediaries and they pay a lot of money to draw in new ideas to adopt or to experiment or to test out. Some of government does almost the opposite. It's often run by lawyers and they view their job as just imposing laws on the whole country. And I think we're going to see a shift where government becomes rather more like business in constantly seeking out the best new innovations, for example, in online education, where the last year has seen an extraordinary surge of experimentation around the world, or how to run welfare systems, how to raise taxes, how to organize democracy, all of these things, seeking out the innovations, making sense of them, in some cases adapting and adopting, and in some cases running formal experiments to see if they can be made to work. And countries like Finland and Canada and to some extent the UK and France are using this experimental method as a very different almost philosophy of public administration to the traditional top-down legal one. And I think this is a much better way to run a 21st century government, using data, using creativity, mobilizing intelligence wherever it may be, but it is still quite alien to some of the more traditional governments around the world. And so they need to learn not only new skills and new structures, but also a new mindset, which is above all a mindset of being hungry for ways to improve what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Just one last question. I read your book, Big Mind, and I truly appreciated your narrative about the future, about the synergy that we will see between human brain and technology. On the other hand, and you also mentioned this example of this experience, I realized also on my personal experience that having available smart devices do not assume absolutely to work and think digitally. So surely portability has expanded the possibility of citizens, democratizing the ability to innovate, giving the possibility to basically everyone to say and to do something, and to probably to become potentially an actor or an actress of innovation. So as a last question, I would like to ask you to explain us what do you mean by democratic innovation? That is a concept that you always highlight in your works. And is this also in relation with the work of the governments?
So most of the forms of our democracy in Italy or the UK or around the world are essentially 19th century. The idea that you vote every 4 or 5 years to send someone to be your representative, to sit in a physical parliament in Rome or London or Washington to make decisions, and then a few years later you come back and either re-elect them or don't. And I think for a long time it's been clear that this is out of sync with how we live so much of the rest of our lives, whether in friendship or in finance or in holidays, where everything is much more digitized. Now, some people a few years ago thought we would simply move from parliamentary representative democracy to everyone pushing buttons or clicking like or not like, permanent referendum. And I think what's happened in the last 10 years is a realization that's almost as bad as the system it was trying to replace. And instead, what we need is forms of democracy which really enhance the intelligence of the society and tap into it in much more thoughtful, deliberative ways. Now, some of that is about parliaments just tapping into experts. So our parliament in the UK, for example, through the crisis, mobilized 15,000 academics to form a kind of support network of advice on everything from behavior to vaccines to infections. We've seen in countries like Taiwan, radical reinvention of their parliament, again, so it taps into public inputs of expertise or experience or ideas as a matter of course in making decisions. And always trying to use platforms not to polarize as Twitter and Facebook so often do, but rather to encourage people to address where there's the potential for consensus, for changing their minds. To me, it seems absolutely crucial that democracy is innovated. The polling evidence all over the world shows reducing confidence in many countries in democracy, particularly amongst younger people who feel it doesn't really reflect, their way of life, their ideas, and their interests. But it's quite a sophisticated task we have. As I say, it's not about simply replacing parliaments with perpetual referendum. That leads to chaos and crazy decisions. It's more about enhancing and amplifying the methods which, as I say, turn the collective mind of 40 million people, 60 million people into something more like a really functioning brain that can think and deliberate and judge and ultimately be wiser as well. And this is, I think, what we most need from democracy is wisdom. And it's something I'm publishing a paper on in a few weeks' time, if you're interested.
Thank you again, Sir Geoff Mulgan, for your time and for your brilliant insights. Me and all our followers are waiting to hear again your thoughts at Forum PA next June. Thank you again.
Thank you, Maro. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.